In a study commissioned of 1,000 Australian managers, they were asked to share how COVID-19 and working from home has influenced the culture in their organisation. Turns out there is some good news, with nearly two-thirds of respondents saying the pandemic has had a massive or moderate positive impact on culture. Here to provide some insight is Michael Hatton, author of Let's Talk Culture. Welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me.
No worries at all. Now, employees are returning to the office. What role does culture play in retainment, given that great resignation that we've been talking about recently?
Yeah, there's a lot of conversation about the Great Resignation at the moment, and probably a little bit of argument about, is it going to hit Australia? Is it happening here? Look, whether or not the Great Resignation is going to take place here in Australia, what we do know is that there is a great reevaluation. People are reevaluating their lives, they're reevaluating work. And while we might have been able to get the attention of people with maybe a paycheck or some perks once upon a time, unfortunately, it's going to take a lot more than that. And I think the answer is culture.
Yeah, all right. Well, let's unpack this a little bit further. Your new book talks about the five key conversations to create world-class cultures. What are they?
Yeah, great question. The culture conversation is a really important one. It's one that we need to include everybody in the team to be a part of. I think there's 5 conversations that we can have where we can help shape a culture by design rather than a culture by default, because the truth is, whether you believe it or not, your team already has a culture. So the first conversation that we can have is an expectation conversation. And this really helps us to be able to make explicit or spoken what is often the unspoken expectations within a team. So what do you expect of me? What do I expect of you? And what does the organization expect of us together? The second conversation is a clarification conversation. And really, this is about making sure that we're on the same page when we say, what do we want and what do we expect? What does that actually look like? And the thing about culture is often at times it's very invisible. And so what we're doing by clarifying is helping make it observable for people. So what does it look like in the actual behaviors that show up in our team every day? The third conversation is a communication conversation. And really, it's about how do we make culture part of our everyday language rather than our values just being something that we write up on a wall. How do we make this part of our everyday conversations through stories and rituals and mantras and memes that we have? And the last 2 conversations really are how we shape culture over time, which is what are the things that we reward and meaningfully celebrate in our team? So what are the things that we want to see more of, and how do we celebrate those intentionally around culture? And the last one is a confrontation conversation, which is how do we actually confront cultural misalignment within our team? And I think if we do that, we can actually start to shape a culture by design within our teams.
Yeah, a very good rundown from you. I suppose that's why you've written a book about this and you are the expert. But your research found that COVID had a positive impact on culture. How so? I feel like everyone was so low and down in the dumps and stressed out.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big difference between, obviously, it was a huge challenging time for a lot of people in a whole lot of different ways mentally. And obviously, we mobilized an entire workforce to be working from home. But there were some positives within that. Nearly 2/3 of the people in our study said culture either substantially or massively impacted their culture in a good way. I think there's a few ways it did that. Number one, we were clearer, a lot clearer around our expectations of each other. What do you expect of me? What do I expect of you? And for the first time, we were forced to confront some of those things that were things that we'd always just done the way that we do them. I think the second thing is there was a whole lot more trust and autonomy. When we can't see people sitting in an office, we need to actually believe and trust that they're doing their job. And so people were able to have a bit more trust, a bit more autonomy, a bit more flexibility. And I think the last thing is it caused a lot of geographically dispersed teams to find new ways of communicating with each other. Now, I know we all don't love jumping on an online meeting, but one thing it did do is force us to communicate more regularly and actually ask questions about how do we like to communicate and collaborate when we can't be in the same room together. So I think there are all some really positive things.
Yeah, so what are some of the culture blockers that leaders should be aware of, I suppose, when they're sitting back and assessing the work culture that they created?
Yeah, there's some really interesting culture blockers. I think the things that help build culture also have a bit of a shadow side to them. So, I mean, because one of the culture blockers can be things like a lack of trust. If I don't trust you and if you don't trust me, it can really impact on our culture together. Negativity from team members and from leaders can really bring the culture down within a team. It can stop us from building the culture we want. Also, absent and disconnected leaders. Nearly half of the people in our research told us that when they couldn't see or hear from their leaders, it really brought down the culture within the organization. And also a set of unclear or unrealistic workload expectations. If you're going to work and coming home every day and you're not really sure where you stand or not really sure how you're going to get all of your work done, it can really affect the culture. And finally, they said a lack of accountability. When there's a lack of accountability, it can really impact and kill a culture.
Shane, a wonderful rundown from you. Thank you so much for joining us on the program and talking all things culture. I think it's an important one to consider, especially as we return to the workplace or working from home, etc. But thanks for your insight.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you so much.